In this episode, we look at real-life ghostly mansions, Hollywood horror sets, and Halloween attractions that dare us to scream. Join us as we step through the creaky doors and dusty hallways of one of the spookiest tropes in pop culture history, haunted houses. Here we go! And here we are again for another episode of Paranormal Popcast. I am Nick.
And I'm Vin.
And today we're talking about haunted houses. As of this recording, yesterday was Halloween. But I feel like Halloween is not only October 31st, it's like the whole month of October. And there are some people who just love these kind of haunting stories year round. So what is it about haunted houses you think that has captured the imagination, Vin? Because there have been so many books, countless movies, and like real life attractions. People pay money to be scared, to go to like haunted hayrides and haunted houses. And so what is it about it, do you think?
I think, it starts off with the fact that we all need a house, right? We all need somewhere to live. So it's right there. It's something anyone can imagine. And honestly, probably everyone has imagined at some point that their house was haunted, that there was something in there. Or I remember when I was a kid, and this is kind of weird, and if I'm remembering correctly, but I know that my parents in my house, it was one of those, if you're from the New York area, I don't know where they are around the rest of the country, but especially on Long Island, they had houses that were called mother-daughter houses.
Okay.
Do you know what those are?
Yeah.
Where you go in and there's a staircase up, staircase down, and it was really designed for not really two families, but a mother and daughter,
an in-law,
an in-law, right? Yeah, that type of thing. So ours was like that, but my parents never set up really the downstairs. It was like a basement. It was just storage and unfinished or whatever. So we lived upstairs, and I used to go down there at night or something. We had a refrigerator down there. We'd bring stuff up, and I was a little kid, and I thought Dracula was down there.
That is where he would live. That's where he would store his coffin.
So I would be there. And years later, my sister was like, I did too. And I think she was like Dracula. For some reason, we both thought Dracula was down there.
That's so funny.
But that's the point. You could always think about in your house, you hear something about a haunted house and you're like, oh, is my house haunted? And it's sort of scary and cool at the same time,
Yeah.
But I think from other perspective too is that haunted houses as being this setting rather than a character or ghost or something in terms of pop culture and writing movies, books, whatever, games, whatever you want to do, it's like an open sandbox, right? You could put anything in the haunted house, right? So and they do there's monsters, there's ghosts, of course, witches, people who live there that are dabbling in the occult or whatever. All of that fits into the idea of something being haunted. I think of Dungeons and Dragons, right? Mm-hmm. Something like that, where you're exploring and you're going through maps and all that kind of stuff. Haunted houses, these big mansions and stuff, sort of fit into that motif. Yeah. Right? There's things to explore. There's secret passageways and different rooms and what's in those rooms and what's in the closets and what's in the attic and what's in the basement. There's a whole exploration thing that comes into play with haunted houses as well, I think.
Yeah, that's a nice analogy, the Dungeons and Dragons, where you don't know where you're going, but you're exploring. And there are people who pay good money sometimes to sleep in an allegedly haunted place, right?
Right.
Just to get spooked. And I guess I talked about this in my other podcast when we were talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I asked the question, why do people like horror stories? Why do people like to be scared? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what is it about haunted houses that attracts so many people? I mean, I talked about Halloween. It's like people decorate their houses and people go through these. I went with some friends a couple of weeks ago to this like haunted place and jump scares around every corner. And we paid money for that. So what is it about it? Why do you think people like to be scared so much?
I think there's probably two pieces of it. Is one, the interest is that sense of the unknown,
Yeah.
right? And fear of death, right? And trying to figure out like what comes after. Is there anything that does come after? Um, and that comes from fear. But I think we enjoy it, or it becomes entertainment as, and this is, I'm no psychologist, but I'll try. I think that comes from a sense of exerting power over it, or
Yeah.
some sort of control, right? Like
Mhm.
you get scared, but you're safe. And again, that's just sort of my opinion on that. I haven't heard like any psychological analysis on specifically on that, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I don't know why we would want to scare
Why
ourselves
would we
like
do
that.
this to ourselves? But I think you're on the right track because when I wrote back in film school, I did a term paper on Alfred Hitchcock. And in one of the interviews he did, they were like, well, why do you like scaring people? Why do you like making these thrillers? And he said he is so afraid himself of police officers and all these things. And in his movies, he presented those themes as scary. And he said it's his way to kind of control his own fear by making it and projecting it onto this fictional story. So we look at all the ways haunted houses have been shown in books and movies and games and these real life attractions. And I
Yeah.
think it is that sense, like you said, of people controlling their fear of the unknown by going to something that they know is fictional, and knowing
Right.
that even though they're getting scared, it's just a movie. It's just a book. It's like, but you get the chills. And it's like, you sometimes like that, right? Like my wife loves the horror genre.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not going to give you nightmares. Isn't that going to gross you out? But it's fictional. It's
Yeah.
kind of a safe boundary, and you could kind of escape into that.
I think that's why it's also attractive to children.
Yeah.
And you turn these monsters into either comedic characters, or something like Scooby-Doo can be kind of scary for a little kid, or in the way that was done. But, movies like Hotel Transylvania, right? That's
Yeah.
the name of it. Those movies, like, it's comedy. All the monsters are funny,
Mhm.
But I think that's the attraction to monsters for kids as well, because
Yeah.
they have irrational fears.
Yep. Is there something under my bed? Is there something in the closet? Is there something down the basement or up in the attic?
Right.
And you tell stories, and suddenly it becomes a little bit more a way to control those fears, right? So before we delve into the pop culture side of it, if we look at haunted houses, there's different explanations about real haunted houses, right? Because we'll talk about
Yeah.
some real ones. It could be that supernatural rationale, right? It could be that there really is some
Yeah.
ghosts or some spirits or something supernatural happening. Or it could be a hoax. There have been a lot of stories of people who've tried to pull the wool over people's eyes and pretended that their house was haunted for fame and money and, things like
Yeah.
that. Then the psychological factors, they might be just suffering from some psychosis themselves or some mental anguish. So they're having a breakdown or they're having nightmares, and then they can't distinguish between the nightmares and what's real. Then there's the environmental rationale, which I think is the most common one, where it's just real shadows, real creaking of the houses. There might be a mouse or a bat in the belfry, right?
Yeah.
So, and
They're-
you hear that and you're like, oh, what is that? Or sometimes when I've seen headlights going by and just projecting on the wall, and it's just a weird
Yeah.
way. I'm like, I've never
Yeah.
seen that before. I once was in a hotel and it was just the curtains were drawn, but there was a shadow and it looked like some monster shadow, but it ended up being like a little cricket. But just the way the light was shining on it really projected it. And I was like, this is really creeped me out, you know? Um, and then the scientific explanation where sometimes somebody could be intoxicated or there might be poisonous gas that just makes you hallucinate. So all these are different reasons why you might be seeing something and then thinking, wow, it's a ghost
Right.
or something else. I like the idea though in stories, Usually it is the ghost. It is a supernatural element
Yeah.
to it, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and then, so we'll look at the history then. Like going back, there have been people who started creating things to kind of tap into people's fears because people were
Right.
paying money to be scared. So you had Marie Tussauds Chamber of Horrors. So it was a wax exhibit that started in France that showed like Marie Antoinette and the guillotine and things like that. And people paid money to see these displays of
Yeah.
just horrific things. And then the Grand Guignol Theater in Paris. I butchered that because my pronunciation is terrible. But they would stage these graphic horror plays. So people would pay money to go see actors perform these horrific, monstrous horror stories.
Mhm.
Now, and that was in the late 1890s. But then the first commercial house that was built as a haunted house where people paid money to go in was Orton and Spooner's Ghost House in 1915. And this wasn't people jumping, jump scares, hiding behind the corner. This was steam power generated where they had these mechanical ways of just the floor would move and these skeletons and things would come out and air would be blown in the face of the people walking through. All mechanical, all really creative. It's kind of what you would see now in an amusement park ride at
Right,
Disney or some
right.
other
Yeah.
places. But this was 1915 with steam power. I mean, it's just incredible.
Sounds safe.
And then the 1930s and 50s was when it really exploded. In my investigation, it seemed like people were trying to counter Halloween night when kids would go out and do pranks and throw eggs
Mhm.
and have, just destroy houses because they weren't getting their treats. So they were like, what can we do? So what they would do is try to create these kind of safe alternatives where, you would come into a haunted house and get your scares that way. And it was more than just getting candy and then bombing the
Right.
houses of the places where you didn't like the candy they gave or they didn't give you any candy. So that's the historic way of doing these fictional things. But then there were the real ones that allegedly have been haunted, right? There was the Myrtles Plantation, where apparently it was built on Native American burial ground. The LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans, the Lizzie Borden House, so
Right.
places where there have been murders,
Yeah.
right? So that's in Massachusetts. The Winchester Mystery House, which I'll talk about because of the movie that was based on it. But this is a house in California that apparently the person who built it was so wacky, kept adding onto it for decades.
I was there.
I'm going to talk to you
Yes.
about it when we talk about that in a little bit. Um, and then the Stanley Hotel, which inspired The Shining, because Stephen
Uh-huh.
King was there. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky, the Whaley House in California. So all these places that maybe have something attached to them. So let's talk about the Winchester House, right? So this was built by the folks who made their legacy from the Winchester rifle. So there's this talk that they felt like they wanted to counter any spirits that were in the house that might be haunting them because of all the deaths that were caused by this rifle. So they built stairways leading nowhere and extensions. You open the door and it's a brick wall or there's nothing. So tell me about your experience visiting it.
Well, it was the woman, I guess she was,
Yeah,
I forget
Sarah
where she was,
Winchester.
Sarah
Yep.
Winchester.
Yep.
So she was the, I don't know if she married into or she was born into the family. But yes, what you were saying is that she had some sort of fear, and whether again it's like it was a psychological illness or whatever, like a paranoia or something like that. The house really is like built like that, where you walk in and there's just a door and a wall behind it, and it's very bizarre. It didn't feel haunted to me in the sense that we were just on a tour,
Okay.
we walked around. Somebody somebody almost passed out, but I think it's like very hot in there too because you know, there's
So
no
it
air
could be
circulation.
environmental or it
Yeah,
could
it
be
could
some real
be.
haunting, right?
Right. Because and they told us some stories, of course, of things that happened. And I would believe it. It just was, I didn't get a sense of anything odd in that. And it's actually, my recollection is like, it's pretty brightly colored,
Okay.
so it's not that typical dark
Right.
sort of look to it, but it's definitely odd for
Yeah.
sure.
And that would make sense if her whole goal was to keep the spirits away, making it bright and making it, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also adding all these bizarre features that would confuse the spirits and make them think they're coming at you instead they're going into a brick wall or going into just an empty space.
Yeah, very narrow,
Yeah.
very like it is. It's like a maze on the inside because when I remember it, all I think about are the hallways. Like I don't really have a recollection of the rooms, which
Like a
like you
maze, right?
said, that's she achieved her purpose, I guess, because really I don't. I remember and it's vaguely it was I think we went 2016
Okay.
in San Francisco, so it's almost 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't necessarily remember every detail of it, but that's what I remember. I remember like staircases and hallways, but if you told me like to describe a single room, I don't think I could.
Yeah. It's on my bucket list. I'd like to go because I saw the movie with Helen Mirren starring in it. I enjoyed the movie. It wasn't anything special, very forgettable in some regards, but I liked it. My wife loved it, so that's on my list to go. Then there's the Amityville Horror House, right? That's in Long Island.
Yeah.
So murders took place there. And there is that sense sometimes that something lingers in a place. So I don't necessarily believe in ghosts per se, haunted houses and stuff, but I do think there is that lingering sense or something bad happened here. That's why a lot of these things take place places where there's been a battle, a war, where a lot of people died, where there's like prisons or hospitals where maybe terrible things happened. So Amityville Horror, right? That was allegedly a place where this murder took place. And now, when I was house hunting with my wife, there was this one place we went to. We got this weirded out vibe to it. Maybe it was because it wasn't really cleaned up very well for a
Hmm.
showing, but there was one room that had like all the windows kind of boarded out. And I didn't say anything. I was in there. And when we walked out, I was like, nope, not for me. And my wife was the same way. And then we both specifically mentioned that room, and we were just like, I just got this weird feeling like something bad happened there, like just like you
Yeah.
get this vibe, and I think that's what a lot of people, they take those feelings that they get and they anthropomorphize them and turn them into like something supernatural, some creatures creating this. And that's when we talk about TV and some of these like reality shows where they're exploring haunted houses. That's what I get sometimes from these hosts. They're like, I got this feeling.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you counter that? We've talked about this in past shows, right? But do you have any experience as a Long Island former resident about Amityville? Because they changed the facade, right? The owners, a lot of tourists were driving by to kind of see that famous, where it looked like the windows were eyes. It was just this
Yeah.
spooky looking house.
That the Amityville Horror House, and people talked about it, of course, all the time back then. I never saw it. I don't think I ever went by it when those windows were still there. My cousin took us, I think, by once, like years later, but yeah, it didn't look
It had
like
changed because we did
what
the
it had
same thing.
changed. But that just goes to show in terms of pop culture, if something just captures the imagination, and those windows were just weird looking, and of course, it's on the cover of the book and whatever. And it also, and I guess, when did that come out? Was it the late 70s? I think it
The
was
book was
the
written
book.
in 1977 by
Right.
Jay
That's what I thought it
Anson.
was around.
And
So
then
it
the
was
movie was
before.
short after that. It was like 1978 or 79, something like that.
Right. And that was before Poltergeist. So it wasn't like it was influenced by Steven Spielberg. But in that time, I think historically you had suburbia happening, right?
Mhm.
Like this was the beginning of suburbia, and Steven Spielberg sort of jumped on that too, the way he did his movies.
Mhm.
They all sort of took place in just like your average, ordinary neighborhood. And back then, that's when people were moving out of the cities into suburbia, and suburbia was sort of exploding. And those were the first, I think, stories that really started to look at the everyday type of haunted house.
Yeah.
And that that brings up like one of the things I was mentioning to you about why haunted houses have that standard look. When you think of a haunted house, you think of that haunted mansion,
Yeah.
right? And like the Victorian era mansion. And I had been prepping for this and doing a little research, and it came up that it was really because when the Gilded Age ended, that there was like a reaction against that whole era
Okay.
of, when the Great Depression happened, all those houses became symbolic of the excess
Mm,
that had collapsed, and that life was gone. And those riches and all those manors and mansions fell into disrepair.
it's a great point.
And at that at that time, then you see, and I think because you have here like the Orton and Spooner Ghost House,
Yeah.
right, from 1915, that's when they started depicting haunted houses for the first time.
Yeah.
Or when it started to spread more, became more popular,
Yeah.
like the idea of a haunted house was really these Victorian mansions played off of the fact that like the Great Depression happened and they represented something sort of dead and
Yeah.
dying, and that sort of Depression era motif. I also add to it too that if you're looking at it from the perspective of this like industrial world that had all these problems that were coming, World War I, World War II, like, and you're looking back at the Gilded Age with this different perspective, but that was also the age of spiritualism and seances
Mm-hmm.
and ghosts. I think all of that tied together brought about like that Victorian mansion type of cliche or stereotype, or eventually became that, sort of stereotype. But again, back to the Amityville Horror House, it started transitioning, I think, in that time to something that was very more, no pun intended, close to home, or pun
Right.
intended,
Right.
but it became that, I think, is the Amityville Horror House. And that's probably why that really grabbed the public's attention, because I think it was probably one of the first that really portrayed just
Yeah.
like the house you could be living in.
Yep.
Because even some of those older ones, I think, well, Psycho, The Haunting was also they weren't like small suburban
Right.
houses, right? They
Right.
were still,
Yeah.
even if they weren't like, Dracula's castle, it was still more like a Victorian type mansion or like a larger
Yeah.
house.
Yeah, and I think every neighborhood had something like that where it was like this big house, probably bigger than a lot of the other houses in the neighborhood, but it was in disrepair, like you said, or maybe it was like abandoned. Nobody had lived in it for a long time. Or maybe somebody did live in it, but they were a recluse and they always
Right.
had their
Yes. That,
windows drawn and yeah, so everybody was like, stay away from that house. A witch
and
lives in there, or there's something bad that
it's,
happened there, or
it's really interesting that there is a historical context for that, though,
hmm. Yeah, the
because it
way you
really
mention
was
it,
the
it's great. It
collapse
makes
of the
sense.
Gilded
Yeah.
Age.
Yeah. And you talked about like Dracula's castle too, like the notion of like these big mansions that are haunted and castles that are haunted, and that ties into like kind of the works of fiction that started even going back to 1764. First Walpole did The Castle of Otranto, which is considered the first Gothic novel, and that was kind of like a haunted castle idea. And before we started recording this episode, you were talking about how Dracula's castle can be considered haunted too.
Yeah.
So it kind of started even Nathaniel Hawthorne in 1851 with the House of the Seven Gables, right? That was
Mhm.
a house that he was inspired by, that it was in his family, that was the architecture was this kind of very interesting kind of, way that kind of led into like the Victorian era. And then The Turn of the Screw by Henry James in 98. So all these ideas of like even the architecture kind of signifying this kind of haunted
Yeah.
house motif, right? Anything you wanted to say about Dracula's castle too before we move on?
I think just from that general sense that the story or the book, and the book is really, have you read the book?
Yeah, it's great.
The book is fantastic. And it is just about this, person who happens upon this castle and Dracula's living in it. But it's not even that he's, like you said, like, oh, this person's weird or a witch. Like, he's undead. So it really is a haunted house.
Yep.
Like there's this otherworldly spirit that inhabits it. And it takes place in really like this otherworldly type of place from certainly from when the book was written. But it also is that late 19th century where it all dabbles in the occult
Hmm.
and all kind of thing. And Dracula is a ritualistic type of monster,
Yep.
right? And the notions of blood, drinking blood, stabbing the heart, all those things play into what is part of haunted houses, just
Yeah.
all those sort of occult horror motifs and tropes coming together in this one locale.
Yeah. And then Stephen King took that notion of Dracula's like haunted castle and Dracula coming out of the castle to unleash his horror
Yeah.
and turned it into Salem's Lot, where it's like
Yeah.
the whole neighborhood, the whole city, the whole town is kind of haunted by these vampires. So he would kind of take those motifs and just play them up. So you had other things. You had The Haunting of Hill House in 1959 by Shirley Jackson. You had Hell House in 1971 by Richard Matheson. All of
Uh-huh.
these are stories and fictions about haunted houses that kind of just unleashed the floodgates
Yeah.
and then Stephen King did The Shining 1977, which is a haunted house story, right? You've got this guy, Jack, who goes with his family. He's got a job. He's an alcoholic. He's trying to regain his life. He gets this job where he has to kind of stay in the Overlook Hotel and over the winter when it's the dead period, pun intended, I guess, right? And, so what's beautiful about that, you could read it into like, it's his alcoholism that's kind of making him see a lot of this stuff. But it's very clear that he makes it seem that, the young son has this power, this shining where he can,
Uh-huh.
he sees dead people, right? He can,
Yeah.
you can see all this stuff. So it's a great novel. I love the Stanley Kubrick movie adaptation, but there's that angle of just taking the haunted house trope and turning it into something new and fresh. What do you think of The
Yeah.
Shining? Did you read the book first or see the movie first?
I
Or
don't know
never
if I've read or seen either.
you have to. And
I
now they've
know.
done
I
they've
know.
done remakes of it,
The thing
right?
with the
And
the movie, I'm sure I've seen it in bits and pieces. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I haven't sat down to watch it is because you sort of know
yeah.
what's going on. It's like,
Yeah,
am I going
sometimes
to
you feel
watch
like
this
you've
or
seen a
something else?
movie
Yeah.
and
That's
you
why I'm not
realize, "Oh,
even sure
I've
if
never seen it
I
before."
read it because I read a lot of the Stephen King books
Mhm.
back in the day, and I don't see any reason why I wouldn't have read that. But
Yeah. That's
I
a
definitely
funny I have a
read,
funny story
yeah.
about that, though. It's like first time I read it was in high school, and spoiler alert, my friend comes up to me and he's like, "So did you get to the point where you find out that red rum is murder spelled backwards?" And I'm like, "Son of a dog, what are you?" Because I
Yeah.
didn't get that. To me, I'm like red rum tied into the character's alcoholism. So then when I was like, "It's murder spelled backwards," I was like, "Oh." So he spoiled it for me.
Yeah, like that I found out at some point. Maybe that was why I didn't
Yeah.
read it. But I think, and without knowing exactly what happens in that book, the idea that where you take like a disease or some sort of illness and you're bringing the house itself in as a
Mhm.
character where
Yeah.
the house itself has some sort of power, and that's part of haunted house tropes and the idea that like a piece of furniture or
Mm.
a piano or something can be,
Or a mirror or
or a
something,
mirror, like
or a
something can be
painting.
invested with a
Yeah.
spirit, and the notion that a house could possess you in
Mhm.
some way. And I don't know. I mean, you would know because you've had, if that was one of the ideas in the ideas or themes in The Shining.
It was, again, kind of this generational thing where a lot of these houses or places have their haunting because of something that's happened in the past.
Right.
So you've had murders that happen in specific rooms. So there's a specific room that Stephen King stayed in at the Stanley Hotel,
Okay.
and he just got this vibe. It's supposed to be one of the most haunted
Yeah.
places, right?
Okay.
So he was just the room he stayed in, right? That number room. People that go there now, they request that room
Hmm.
specifically. And in the story, in the movie, and in the book, there is that one room where there's something bad has happened.
Yeah.
So all the visions that they see and the blood and the ghostly apparitions and stuff, it all ties in that something happened. And then it goes on with everybody else. It's kind of trapped. And it's the notion that yeah, sometimes there's these malicious spirits and beings that are haunting it and they just want vengeance, or they want some. Other times it's misunderstood, where it's like people they might not know they're dead and they're still there. Like
Yeah.
Beetlejuice was like another example, where it's like they're tied into that place, right? And they don't want to. They're not necessarily malicious, ghosts, right? But
Right.
they want, that's their home, right?
I'm sure that's where the term restless spirits
Yeah,
comes from,
yeah,
like they're just restless, it's not necessarily malevolent.
yeah. And people build a house on a place where it's like a cemetery or a graveyard or something bad has happened. Or in the, prior owners, something bad has happened
Yeah.
and it just lingers and they want acknowledgement. They want not to turn this into like, you know, an amusement for other people.
Right.
This is the respect that this is like a burial ground or this, and that's where Poltergeist. That's a great movie, right?
Yeah.
You're a fan of Poltergeist,
Yes.
so that's fantastic. And everybody remembers the little girl where she's looking at the
Right.
TV, and they take her, and what a great story. But yeah, the whole notion in the end, they hint at it. The MacGuffin, right, is that they built this house on this burial ground,
Yeah.
and then everything else that happens is what makes it entertaining, right? The thing in the TV, the levitation and the things moving around, and it's a great premise.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
I mean, at least for me, and I don't recall older stories or movies that had what Poltergeist had, which was again Steven Spielberg just bringing it very close to home and almost to the reality of what it is. Even
Hmm.
if do you believe, do you not believe? I tend to believe in things maybe more than you do, but really, if you're talking about poltergeist activity and like a chair moving and things like that just in your kitchen, right? Like something moves, something is pushed off the
Hmm.
shelf or things like that. That came into, I think, pop culture really with Poltergeist.
Yeah, and I'm sure he picked and chose these stories that came before, but it was Poltergeist that put even that word into the common
Right.
lexicon, where people were like, "Oh, what is a poltergeist? Oh, it's this kind of like unfriendly spirit thing that like causes mischief around the house and makes your cabinet doors open and makes your bed start shaking and right." So,
And the thinking of like Spielberg doing that, because I'm giving him credit, but also that was Stephen King. Like
mhm.
that era of horror was, very much, I would say, an understated horror,
Yes.
right? I think it was a reaction against that, like, well, nobody relates to a Victorian mansion because nobody lives in a Victorian mansion anymore. We all live in suburbia. It's
Mm.
scarier if we place these monsters where everybody really lives,
Yeah. This poor little girl looking at the TV
yeah,
screen and the ghosts in the
exactly.
screen, right? It's like,
Spielberg and Stephen King, both of them
mhm.
really brought that into pop culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, before that, there were a lot of other movies that we're not going to have time to talk about, but there was a lot of them, right? Some of my favorites were like the one with Vincent Price, where he gets people to come, uh, House on Haunted Hill. Yes, House on Haunted Hill. It was directed by William Castle. Right? He's the guy that always did like, would put tinglers on seats
Mhm.
or have, all these kind of gimmicks to get people to come into a movie theater. But that's where, the character invites five guests to try to win $10,000 by staying overnight in this haunted house. So that's that premise that I just
Yeah.
love, where, it's just like the challenge, and is it real? Is it not? Are you playing with these characters? And then, after that, there's been so many. The Frighteners, The Haunting, Stir of Echoes by Richard Matheson, right? Nine with Kevin Bacon. Great ones, just a bunch. The Orphanage, Paranormal Activity. So that makes it so easy with these found footage kind of genres, where it's like you don't have to do a lot of elaborate special effects. You could do really these tricks of camera and lighting and jump scares, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like everything's so quiet. And I always say there's a jump scare coming because things are getting too quiet. But those are the kind of movies I kind of like in terms of horror. I don't like the gore and the blood as much
Yeah. Mm,
because I think that kind of disgusts you more than scares you. Um, but the
I
jump scares, right? It's
yeah.
really really amazing.
I took a course in college on horror literature,
Mhm.
and in it, we watched movies too. So the course was both books and movies because the professor felt like horror film was just as important as horror literature, you know?
Mhm.
And I think the movie that we saw, it's one because so the Haunting of Hill House, A House on the Hill, The
Yeah.
Haunting, I think it's The Haunting.
Yeah, they're
Um,
also interchangeable after a while,
yeah,
right?
I think it's The Haunting, which was a movie from 1963. But what it's known for is that there is never a depiction of any ghost or spirit or anything in the whole movie. It's all just like camera shots of doors and like
Yeah.
tension is just built on the idea that something's there, but you never actually see anything. And I remember watching that movie and it was amazingly well done because it really was. There was no forget blood and gore. There was literally no monster, which again also speaks to the whole question behind all that stuff. And you're almost in there experiencing that psychological question like, is there really something here or not? I don't think the movie ever is not making a statement like this is all in your mind. It's that you don't know what it is.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of movies like that that you can interpret it like, yeah, it is a haunting, a real supernatural force, or like you said, it could be somebody's imagination. This is their perception, and they're going crazy, or something's happening. I just went to see Good Boy, and it's told from the dog's point of view, and his master is getting sick, and a lot of it could just be, all right, is it a real haunting? And it implies that the movie
Hmm.
implies that this is not the first time that this has been happening, and the dog is seeing all these things, or could it just be the dog is so bonded to his owner that seeing them sick and dying is making them kind of see these, this is their perception of what they're seeing. It's this horror, right?
Right.
So good movie, low budget, but I think you should definitely check that out. There's been a bunch of others. Then on TV, you've got American Horror Story. I don't know if you've seen that series. That's the anthology series where every season it's kind of a new story. The first one was about a haunted house, and now they
Hmm.
call it Murder House since all the others have subtitles. I loved it. It got a little gory and gruesome towards the end, and that happens with a lot of their seasons. But again, playing up this haunted house and this generational thing where it's like secrets buried in the past and now are coming out through these supernatural elements. So have you seen that or any other fictional TV series you want to talk about?
I haven't seen that.
Mm.
I wrote down some of these things that I don't recall
But that
any
one was a good one.
particular
Yeah.
haunted house story like from TV, but I think what you say about American Horror Story too, and this idea of things coming out of the past, that really is a lot of what a haunted house sort of brings to the story because the house is permanent. It's there
Mm.
before us, it's there after us. In theory,
Hmm.
obviously, but the notion of your past or somebody's past and the
Mm.
deeds done bubbling up, like what you
Yeah.
said, bubbling up and then affecting things now. Um, there's a lot to explore in those themes as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the notion that you said that the house itself is a character. So even these things where maybe it's not a traditional haunting, like the
Right.
Bates Motel, you just look at it and you're like, something bad happening in there. And, the Munsters, right? The great
Yeah.
comedy series, like the house itself just kind of looks like, hey, that's a haunted house. It's like you said, like a
Right.
dilapidated Victorian type mansion. And there's these like vampires and Frankenstein monsters living in there and werewolf boys, um,
Yeah.
it's really great.
Well, TV, yeah, like those old. I wasn't a big fan of the Addams Family, but I loved the Munsters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was well, the concept behind the monsters is interesting because that was like a flipping the script on the everyday suburbia.
Yeah.
Like that was what that was your everyday family, but they were monsters.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like it was sort of that was the idea was to be we're going to make a sitcom that's just a regular sitcom, only they're monsters. You know, so that sort of flipped the script on that whole thing.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, all the tropes were in there.
Yeah. They had
In
like
terms of
a
the house, the
dragon in the
dragon in the
basement.
basement, and the you know the laboratory.
Yes, yes.
There were, I think, you know, there were like all kinds of like traps and things and hidden rooms
Exactly.
in that castle too. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So I guess have you we've been to places like attractions. You talked about being at the Winchester House. I've been to the Haunted Mansion at Disney World. And then they made that into a movie, two
yeah,
movies or more probably. But that's fun. Like you go in and it's like the walls are moving, the the paintings, their eyes are moving, there's visuals, and then you get strapped in and you go and you look through a mirror and then you see there's a ghost sitting next to you.
yeah.
I just think that was a great attraction. Have you been on that one?
Yes, I've been on that one. I was on it as a kid and also as an adult, and I think I'm not sure if we took my kids on it because they were scared of everything, so they
Yeah.
might not have done that. Which was the one I'm thinking of Tower of Terror too,
Tower of
which
Terror, right?
I
Which
guess
was the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror
yeah,
too that
and
they did as well.
that's sort of a haunted house motif, I
Yep,
guess, too, when you're going
exactly.
through it.
Yeah.
And that was fun because you have like when you're outside of that in the park, and the windows open up when you
Yes.
drop,
So maybe
right? So
I'm
like
combining the two because I've been on
yeah,
both.
I
So
combine well,
there's
I
that
was
great
combining the
drop. Yeah, yeah,
2.
yeah.
I was combining the 2. When you said Haunted Mansion, I was
Uh,
thinking of the other one.
uh-huh.
And yeah, the Haunted Mansion is just, it's like a kids ride through the thing and you see the ghost in the
Uh-huh.
chair with you. But the Tower of Terror, what made me laugh was and that was the skull you don't know, like, then you come and the windows open and you look out and
It's
you
like
drop, and it's one of those drop things. But when you're out in the park, you're just walking around and you just hear
you hear screams.
like, like every like 5 minutes or something, it's just like
Yeah.
you hear like screams coming out of the thing. And if I remember correctly, they have all the stuff like playing like the
Yeah.
thunder and lightning and everything. But it's just in both of those, it's just taking the idea of the haunted house and making it
Mhm.
fun, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And that's it. It is fun and it is great to be kind of spooked and scared. And then there's the real tragedy. There was one at Six Flags Great Adventure back when we were kids. I
Yeah.
remember going to it and it was a haunted house experience, jump scares, people jumping out at you and dressed like monsters and then it burned down and I think a bunch of teenagers got killed in that attraction. So it's almost like sometimes these like haunted things lead to real tragedy, like Poltergeist, the curse of Poltergeist.
Yeah.
The poor little girl died after the sequel, and there is those kind of just notions. What do you think? Did you go to the one and that burned down
I did
beforehand,
not
or?
go to the one that burned down, but my aunt and cousins had gone, and this was before,
Mhm.
obviously before this happened. But I remember this story was that the way it was set up, there were like, well, you were there, right? There were like, you couldn't really see and you had to find your way out. Like what that was part of the attraction was that it was like a maze.
Mhm.
So they got kind of lost in it
Mhm.
and panicked. They ended up going out an exit door that they found
Mhm.
somewhere because they literally got lost in the mansion. And so that I remember because when the fire happened, I remembered what had happened to my aunt was that people just couldn't find their way out because there were no lights,
You
there
just
was
see
no
the
way to
smoke and
escape.
everything. It was
So
terrible tragedy. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so that's a thing with some of these, and that changed, obviously changed a lot in terms of safety and
Yeah.
making sure these things are safe. But you have haunted hay rides and Halloween and things like that,
Right.
and particularly the haunted houses where things are jumping out and grabbing, and that's part of the
Hmm.
attraction. But there is sort of an inherent danger in that kind of like close up type of thing, and the idea of like you're supposed to be scared, while confined into this space.
Yeah. And now they've got so many rules for safety where they're
Right.
like, do not touch the performers, they're just actors, because there's stories about people like somebody jumps and you punch them, and I'm like, I'm just an actor, dude. I'm like, but yeah, so that's but yeah, it's that was a horrific thing. I remember hearing about that fire, and
Yeah.
just terrible. And then a lot of the whole notion of the curses attached to a lot of these movies and stories, but then the fun element too, like this the comedies that were made of these haunted houses. My wife loves this series Ghosts, based on the British series was excellent. The CBS series is excellent. And then if you want video games, there's Seventh Guest, which I loved back in the 90s, I think. It was right around the time of Myst, which was one of my favorite video games.
Uh-huh.
So it's a puzzle game, just like that, but you're in a haunted house. So the house is haunted, and you have to solve all these different puzzles to kind of go to level after level. So that's a great one if people are
Which,
trying to hunt it down. It was called Seventh Guest.
and what was
I forgot I think it was a PC based game.
it's
It was
it's
fun.
very similar to a game that we had on the Atari 800,
Okay.
like this is in the 80s, called Action Quest.
Okay.
And you were a ghost. And again, it's, the old style pixelated, just like square rooms with like a door.
Okay.
And you had you had this little ghost and you went in through the door and there would be like some sort of puzzle to solve. And they
Hmm.
were like pretty simple puzzle, but some of them were tough. You couldn't
Yeah.
like figure it out. But again, the games were like 32K, right?
Hmm.
But your ghost would start to fade. So that was the time you had. Like if you didn't solve the puzzle by
Hmm.
the time your ghost faded, then you were done.
Yeah.
But like if you got it, you beat that level and you went to the next puzzle. It was a great game. We played that all the time. That I remember the Super Mario games
Okay.
had haunted mansions in
Hmm.
them. That was some of the levels.
Yeah.
And I think it was Super Mario 3
Uh-huh.
um that had like a really cool haunted mansion in it.
Nice.
And those are the ones that I remember. I think there's other ones but that's not really like Castle Wolfenstein
Yeah.
but that wasn't really a haunted. That was a World War II, I think, thing, but it took place in a similar type of thing. I'm trying to think if there are any other games that I recall.
Right. Castlevania. There's a bunch of these like
Oh,
kind of.
Castlevania.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Castlevania was another good one with every level had these
Yeah.
different like skeletons
Yep.
and things like that.
Yeah. And I could totally see like a Dungeons and Dragons type, where you're just going through a house. So set it in modern times, and you still have a lot of these supernatural elements you got to discover and beat different characters to kind of get through it. What do you think? Before we wrap it up, like, what do you think of like some of the real reality shows where it's just you go to some of these haunted places and you try to capture them, and they use these technology tools, these things to measure temperature, and are you getting some kind of electromagnetic thing going on? And so what do you like some of those shows, or
I like
um
all those shows.
it makes
And
you say to yourself,
it's all
maybe
real.
I could be a ghost hunter.
That's right. Well, I mean, I have my thing with those shows is, and I do like them. I think my favorite one is Ghost Adventures because it's
Okay.
like Scooby Doo Live. I think I like to call it.
You would have gotten away with it
But
too if it wasn't for you dastardly
exactly,
kids.
and the greatest paranormal caught on camera.
Yeah, I love that.
You
It's
know,
one of my favorite
but
shows.
really, I think most things that you see on there are not provable. That's like the bulk of everything, right?
Mhm.
There are ones, particularly on, paranormal caught on camera, that I'll watch that and I'm like, that's fake. That's not
Yeah.
like that kid just, I can tell
Yeah.
or whatever. I won't believe it at all. But you watch it because you see some stuff that you cannot explain. And I've seen ghost adventures, whatever you want to watch. I've had things happen like to me sometimes that like are like similar to things that happened in college and not like drunk or anything like that. They were just actually I should, because this was really strange, because a lot of stuff, I went to school in Ithaca, and there were a lot of paranormal stuff that happened that at the time I didn't realize exactly, what it was. So here's the one thing was that the room that I was in was in the East Tower. That was the dorm, and it was like a 14-story, actually it was probably like 13 stories, but you don't count 13th floor. Um, but yeah, it was a tower with the dorm rooms, and I got, my room assigned or whatever. And I guess that was 86 when I started. My brother went to the same college in 1995. His freshman year, he got the same exact room,
Oh, wow.
the room I was in. Okay, same exact room. And so when he was there, like a couple of weird things happened. Um, one of them, of which his friend saw a black figure sitting on their chair. He woke
That's
up at night and saw the figure and said to my brother, like, something was sitting on the chair. My brother looks and he's like, there's a pile of clothes on the chair. My brother doesn't really believe in any of this stuff. And he's like, no, it was sitting on the clothes. Right.
scary.
So that happened. And then another one was my brother always put his wallet down next to his chair, next to his bed when he went to sleep by his like clothes, and they wake up, he get his wallet and whatever. And he wakes up one day and the wallet's gone. And he's like, where did I put? Like, you didn't, like, he was like freaking out. Like, did I leave it somewhere? Like, what happened? And his roommate was getting up to leave. And, he puts his jacket on and he puts his hands in his pockets, and my brother's
There's the
wallet is in it.
wow.
The last thing that happened was somewhere during the year, my brother lost his mail key. And the last day is when they were leaving at the end of the school year. My brother is about to leave. Everything was emptied out. And he walks in and the key is sitting on the chair. Right. So that's all poltergeist type of
Yeah.
activity. Right.
And you
So,
hear that, yeah.
but here's the thing, and this is where like freaky. And again, the thing is, all these things, like dark figures, poltergeist activity, we didn't know any of that. Like, I never thought of I didn't know what a dark figure was when that happened. When I was in that room, and this was and I had forgotten about this. I remembered it like, probably like 10 years or so ago when these ghost adventure things started happening. I go into my closet in that room and I had this flannel shirt. It was like a yellow and black flannel shirt, regular flannel. And I pull it out of the closet and there were 3 slashes, like slashed with a
My
razor
god.
blade
Oh my gosh.
down the, right, down the thing. It was shredded, literally shredded. And I pulled it out and my friend saw it and he was like, laughing like, oh, Vin, you had a wild night. So, and I'm like, I'm looking at it. It's like, how would I not know
That you scratched it up
that
like that, huh?
even if it caught on something, it was just bizarre. Like, I'm like, how could that have possibly happened? And it looked, because it did, it looked like someone took razor blades,
Wow.
3 razor
Or a
blades, 3.
claw right
Right.
down the back.
But I never thought of that. That's why, like, some of those things that you can't explain,
Right.
I threw the shirt out. I'm like, what the hell happened? And then 20 years later, I'm like, oh my God. I would have told my brother, like, don't go in that room. It's for
Something
another
must have happened
room.
in that room. That's so funny. But yeah, there's like every campus has like these like haunted stories and haunted places, and you were gonna say something else about it that happened there,
Not
or
that, but that was my friend, his senior year. They rented a house downtown, and you go in the house, and in the kitchen there was like a little white pantry, and written on it in red and magic marker was the words haunted,
Mhm.
and under it blue boy in blue magic marker. Like, who
Okay.
knew what that was? But they had like poltergeist activity happening in that house.
Mm.
And again, I didn't know what any of that stuff was. I
Yeah.
recognized it years later, and we went up, but my friend was like, "You have to go in the attic. The attic is really creepy." So we go up, like, he takes me up the attic, and it's, like, empty, but in the middle of it is, like, an Archie Bunker, like, easy chair with, like, a little table next to it and a television set in the middle of the attic,
It's
and they're
weird.
like, We don't go in here." So, but, these places are, like,
Yeah.
all over the place, but I mean, this is why it's so relatable because
Yeah.
probably everybody has like these stories of like
Yeah.
this weird house or
And like you said, I don't necessarily buy into all that stuff. I'm a very spiritual person. Like I believe in an afterlife and things like that, right? But in terms of the hauntings, I'm like, "Oh, okay, it's fraud, or if it's, people like all those other explanations I gave at the top of the show, where it's like, there's a natural explanation for it, right?
no, there isn't.
But even I have had those
Yeah.
experiences, like with
Like what?
theaters, there's
Yeah.
so many horror stories you could tell because so many people walk through and they've had, I went to Fordham University and we worked in Collins Theater and there's stories. John Collins haunts the place, right? And there's the upper rafters where you go up there and they nickname it Oz, right? So we've gone up there to put things up and hang lights and there's like a furnace in there and it's very spooky and you're walking on
Uh-huh.
planks. And then when we had to strike a show after the show, we'd spend long hours pulling down the set and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and I was still working there with like two other people. And this one girl is like, "Do you hear that?" And I'm like, "What?" And we're listening. It's really quiet. It's dead at night, right? And it's footsteps. Now it's not like a rat up there or a bat. It is literal footsteps. Somebody was walking up there.
Yeah.
We were the only ones there was nobody up there. So I panicked a little bit. I was like, we have to get out. So that's an example. That's like what
Yeah.
things is like. I mean, it was literally footsteps, right? And that was like scary moments like that. But there are prisons that give ghost tours. There are cities that
Yeah.
brag about being the most haunted places. We went to Savannah, Georgia with my family, and there's a lot of ghost tours and a lot of great stories, right? This is a town that like survived the Civil War where they never burned it
Yeah.
down, but yet you had that horrific, the yellow fever or whatever it was that killed so many people. So the cemeteries, so many stories where you go
Yeah.
there about hauntings and battlefields where you had Civil War battles and people died and you give ghost stories there. So a lot of hauntings. So we didn't talk about comic books like Lock and Key that were inspired that turned into a movie. But there's so much more to talk
Yeah.
about. We just don't have the time. But is there anything we left out that you want to mention or um any other attraction you might have seen or a movie or a TV show about haunted houses?
I think the only one I could, because it's kind of a funny story. It's a very 70s story because there's a movie called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
Okay.
And my mom likes horror movies, right? And so I mean, I must have been, it was definitely elementary school, but I think I was like probably like 6 or 7 years old,
Mhm.
like maybe 7. And me and my sister were like my mom's watching a movie. She's like, "Oh, this is a really good movie called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark." And we're like, "Okay." So we watch it. And it was the scariest movie you've ever seen, right? Because it was about like again, and from what and I remember this pretty well. I never watched it again, but the it's a woman, Sally, her name is, who is seeing like these like little creatures like gnomes in her house that are like coming after her
Oh my gosh.
and no one believes her, right? So again, it's like the psychological thing. But they would like, when no one was around and she was alone in the house, they would come out from the closets and stuff. They'd be like saying her name, Sally, Sally, right?
That's freaky.
And like, spoiler alert, in case, everybody close your ears if you're, unless you want to see it and you want to know the end. But basically, it's not really a happy ending. And, and like, I was terrified
How
from
old were
this
you?
movie,
You
like
must have been
7, I don't know, like, and I would go to bed at night and I had like my parents had gotten me like those Encyclopedia Britannicas. I had a bookshelf with them thing, and I like
right.
pictured them coming out from like between the bookshelves, like these little gnomes coming out after me, and like, again, years later, I was we're talking to my sister or we're talking to my mom. We're like, why'd you let us watch that movie? And my sister's like, I thought they were in my closet. I thought they were under my bed.
Don't be
It
afraid of the
was a
dark.
scary movie.
I gotta look up.
At
I've heard
least for a
about that
kid.
one. Yeah, and I've heard good things, so I gotta check
Like,
that out as well.
still say to my mom, like, what'd you let us watch this for? She's like, it's a good movie. What was
It's a good
wrong with
movie.
it?
That's so great. I think that'll do it. I'm sure there's a bunch of others that we haven't
Yeah.
talked about. So those of you who are listening in, please leave a comment. Tell us what we left out or what your experience has been with any of those things that we've mentioned. And if there's others we should check out. So like, follow, subscribe, share, and I hope you tune in again. Thank you to my co-host, Vin. This has been another fun episode of Paranormal Popcast. See you next time.
See ya.